Thanks, Rob. This is Susan Patrick, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm the President and CEO of iNACOL. Today we'll explore federal and state policy issues for digital learning. How is policy holding us back? How is policy supportive of new learning models? And what is happening at the state and federal level right now with our goals of personalized student-centered learning, for online and blended learning are powerful innovations for students. Number one, we will start by covering and sharing iNACOL's top 5 federal policy issues and also iNACOL state policy issues very briefly. We work closely with our membership at iNACOL to get feedback and support of these policy issues. Then we will turn to the excellent analysis overview and dive into John Bailey's presentation covering federal and state policy specifics and where we are today. With that, I will begin on update and policy. iNACOL's top federal policy issues are focused on federal role and accountability to support competency education and move away from time-based policies that lock in single point end of year testing and really start to think about reconceiving the ESEA reauthorization around competencies and new learning models. Number 2, and this is related to accountability, is to support systems, plural, of assessments. That means that there can be multiple types of assessments offered at multiple points in the year, including the data from entry assessment or adaptive assessment, data from performance-based assessments, as well as those summative assessments that we understand are required right now for state and federal accountability, but offered at multiple points in the year in case a student is advancing on mastery and reaches those points before the end of the year, that we want to see that summative assessment happen or be available at multiple points. Third, investing in federal research for K-12 online and blended learning. There are major gaps in the knowledge, baseline data, demographic data, and understanding the field to support research on effective models and approaches. Fourth, supporting the people that run our schools and that are providing instruction, supporting that human capital development through redesigned pre-service and in-service training for online and blended learning that is competency-based. And number 5, the focus on federal policy for ensuring reliable and ubiquitous student access, teacher access to the internet, and quality learning materials. To focus on state policy, iNACOL published a statement of principles for model state legislation. Number 1 is around competency education. Moving away from seat time is our number 1 policy priority at iNACOL. Number 2, increasing access so that every student has access to the entire continuum of student-centered online and blended learning opportunities. Number 3, designing outcomes-based accountability and funding incentives. We're doing a project right now on developing a model state funding formula that would take into account performance-based funding and quality assurance with equity and adequacy for student characteristics and student needs. Number 4, we're interested in increasing access to highly effective teachers. And number 5, ensuring that state policy provides enough flexibility to allow for continuing innovation, that it focuses not on inputs, but focuses on measuring quality on outcomes. And with that, the final state policy issue, which is related to federal policy as well, is this huge need to improve our broadband and technology infrastructure. So it's perfect timing that we're having this webinar today, the day after the State of the Union address. And we have with us John Bailey, who's the Executive Director of Digital Learning Now. He co-founded and serves as a senior advisor at Whiteboard, a strategic consulting practice for investors, philanthropies, and entrepreneurs. John worked on domestic and innovation policy in the White House on education. He worked at the U.S. Department of Commerce and at the U.S. Department of Education. He was Pennsylvania's first Director of Educational Technology. He advises and was a program officer with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Welcome, John. We are so glad to have you in the post of Executive Director for Digital Learning Now to take on and tackle these important policy issues at the state and federal level. I will turn it over to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Susan. Really appreciate it, and thanks to everyone for taking time. We're going to go very quickly through some slides with just some, very high-level federal trends, some state policy trends to take a look at. We prepared the slide these slides not really knowing what was going to come out of State of the Union, and so we'll just do a quick wrap up there and then turn it over to you for question and answers. But it is, I know as Susan has told you, there's never been a more exciting time to be in education, particularly in digital learning and online learning and blended learning. That this is just, there's so much innovation happening out there. And lots happening with public policy that kind of impacts all of that. And so we'll hit on a couple of the macro things. First, Andy Rotherham and I do a monthly survey, roughly monthly survey, of a group of about 50 to 70 what we call DC insiders. This isn't a nationally representative poll. It's not intended to be. What it is, it's a survey of people that are currently or have been in a very senior role at the U.S. Department of Ed, in one of the education or leadership committees over in Congress, at the White House, or in various organizations that are very much at the table in terms of shaping the federal and sort of national education debate. And the whole idea of this is that if you give them anonymity and do a blind survey and ask them questions, can you get a high degree of accuracy in terms of a forecast of stripping away the talking points, what people have to say, what people really think will happen. We've been asking a question for the last couple of years about when will ESEA be reauthorized, NCLB. And you can see we've been asking this. This current data set goes all the way back to April, but we go all the way back to about July 2010. And there was huge pessimism amongst the insiders that we would see a reauthorized ESEA bill. But I want to just flag for you in our most recent survey that there's still a high degree of pessimism, that 63% of the insiders think it'll happen after January 2015. So essentially, again, looking 3 or 4 years out from now, and just not terribly optimistic. I think actually State of the Union somewhat confirmed that. We did not hear the President really call on Congress to reauthorize ESEA or give them a date specific the way he did on some things like immigration and on some of the other bills. The gun control being a good one, where he said, students, and it listed through a lot of the victims of gun violence and saying they deserve a vote. But you didn't hear that same sort of call to action in terms of reauthorizing the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. In fact, if anything, we heard probably more of a signaling of shifting to the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, which is scheduled for renewal or reauthorization coming up here. Second, the most significant thing to really focus on in the next couple of weeks is what happens with the budget. We have sort of a series of mini fiscal cliffs that are going to be hitting over the next couple of months. What Congress did is really just sort of, when they passed a bill back in January 2nd, it really just sort of punted a lot of decisions throughout this coming year. And so it is going to have huge implications for this year's budget. It actually will have implications for the budget that the President is about ready to announce. And so, there's going to be a lot of turmoil trying to figure out what this actually means for dollars and cents for elementary schools, secondary schools, and higher education. So look for that. We're going to see, we're just a couple weeks away from March 2nd from when the sequestration is supposed to hit. And so Congress and the administration have to pass something to either temporarily, again, move that down a couple of months, or to create some sort of permanent fix. And there's a lot of debate as to what's going to be happening there. We're also seeing, from a financial standpoint, some continued strain to state budgets. 31 states have addressed or projected shortfalls for next year. And by addressed, it means that they've either done cuts or they've reallocated resources to help sort of make up the cuts. But generally speaking, you're still seeing very tight budgets. Tax revenues are increasing at the state level, but not nearly enough in order to help make up some of these gaps. And again, this is all budgets that were passed and have been addressed before the sequestration hits. And so, you know, as you have Medicaid, and as you have some of this Medicaid funding, education funding, and other sort of funding streams that flow down the states, that's going to create holes and sort of wreak havoc on state budgets as well. So lots of budget uncertainty. One of the things we've been doing with insiders more recently in the last survey in January was ask them, you know, do we think we'll see more or less emphasis at the federal level and at the state level on digital learning? And here you can say that the vast, you know, about half of the insiders think we'll see about the same. Close to a third think we'll see slightly more emphasis in digital learning. This is a very broad definition of digital learning as well. However, when you look at the state level, here you saw a huge sort of swing where more than half of the insiders think that we'll see more emphasis or about the same emphasis. And what we'll show you here in a minute is that there's a lot of activity happening at the state level, and that from a policy standpoint, the actors to watch aren't necessarily the federal officials in Congress or the administration, but kind of what's happening in the state houses and the state departments of education at the state level. And just to illustrate that, since 2011, there's been more than 847 bills dealing with some form of digital learning in about 46 states. And that includes everything from online learning, it includes blended learning, it includes various types of technology initiatives for devices or for broadband to schools. So again, a very broad definition, but it just shows you that there's a huge amount of at least energy in state legislatures. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're seeing all these bills passed. I mean, on average, you know, it's roughly around 5% at the federal level, and that's pretty much true in state houses as well. But still, a huge amount of activity that's happening in states. For just the 2012 and 2013 sessions, there's been close to 200 bills already introduced. And you can see the chart over on the left that most of these are pending, but you have a couple that in New Jersey that were enacted, in Virginia there was just one recently in Massachusetts that is shaping the virtual school law up there. But again, you know, what this is to illustrate more than anything is that there's a lot of activity that's happening that's going to impact online learning and blended learning specifically, as well as competency-based too. So a couple of states to just highlight, particularly in terms of states that are enacting reforms that were passed as bills last year. Louisiana's course choice program is really, I think, quickly becoming a national model in terms of how to do a modular online learning program from a state policy perspective. So it provides a menu of course providers that have been approved by the state that can come from around the country. It's a mix of nonprofit as well as school districts, colleges, as well as private providers. And they have a real innovative funding formula too that I know our colleagues over at InnoSight, you know, are really supportive of. But it's based off of per student formula funding. And it has 10% stays of the savings, actually stays with the district. And then there's a pay for performance component in terms of completion and a performance component based on when a student passes one of the assessments there. So it's one of the more interesting funding formulas that's going to be tested out as the program sort of gets enacted over this next year. Utah, again, it was sort of one of the leading states back in 2011, has been rapidly trying to implement the Senate Bill 65, which again, you know, sort of built on the digital learning, or 10 essential elements of digital learning. It funds success rather than just seat time, meaning that, again, providers are paid based on performance and based on completion, not just based on how much time they served kids. So real innovative approach there too. Minnesota is working in terms of helping to offer teacher preparation programs to help make sure that the teachers there have some skills training as it relates to teaching in an online and blended learning environment. States to watch over this next year. Georgia has passed a course choice program themselves, but the governor there just launched a digital learning task force that is looking at ways of, in terms of helping to further accelerate blended learning models. They're exploring competency-based learning as an issue and trying to really map out a path for Georgia to take, building on the good work that they've done in the online learning space. Pennsylvania has been a state that Susan and Michael Horn and I have been spending a lot of time working with more recently. They're they're tackling a host of issues, from some very thorny and tricky cyber charter school funding issues, including some bills that have just popped up in the legislature that could be pretty damaging to cyber charters in terms of some very just blunt ways of addressing some of the funding concerns and quality concerns that have been sort of percolating up. And so it's going to require, I think, a pretty significant advocacy effort, not just to help sort of push back on that, but also give them some alternatives about thinking about ways of addressing some of these questions, particularly around the funding formula there. The governor in his State of State address just about 2 weeks ago proposed wanting to move to an online course choice program, again, something similar to what Louisiana, Utah, and Georgia are putting into place. And they also have a competency-based education report that's coming out that would look at the issues of how do they move away from seat time and start awarding credit based on competency, not just based on time spent in a classroom. Texas, you have a pretty broad sweeping education reform package that was proposed by the Speaker of the House, including another course choice program with online learning. It would use the iNACOL standards of quality as one of the benchmarks upon which course providers would be approved. But again, a very comprehensive package, and it's going to stimulate and stir up some, we think, some pretty constructive debate in Texas as well. One other state to really watch is Maine. Maine has been leading a multi-state one-to-one laptop initiative where other states are invited to opt in, and then from that aggregated sense of purchasing, trying to negotiate down the prices for devices that can be used inside of schools. We think this is going to be critical, not just to help with blended learning and digital learning options inside of traditional schools, but it's also going to be incredibly important as states wrestle with the devices and bandwidth requirements for the new Common Core assessments, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But again, watch the Maine one-to-one laptop initiative. Some emerging trends and challenges, just sort of top-line things to sort of think about. One is this trend of states shifting from being the sole provider of online courses to brokering a portfolio, a menu, or catalog of courses. So in the old days, you used to have a state just set up a virtual school, and then that was the online program. Now what you're seeing is states setting up virtual schools, but then also building out catalogs of courses that are offered by a whole myriad of different providers, private, nonprofit, colleges, as well as some school districts as well. So this is a huge trend that seems to be, again, getting more interest from various governors and state legislators. We also think that this is a potential opportunity to develop interstate agreements between those different states that have course approval processes. So if you think about the steps that a state has to take in terms of approving a course provider or approving a specific online course, it's not too dissimilar from what happens with teacher certifications. Teacher certifications approve a provider, a school of education, their certification requirements, and then they issue a certification, essentially an authorization to teach within the state. But the remarkable thing that's kind of emerged over the last couple of years are these teacher reciprocity agreements, where if you receive a certification in one state, you're automatically authorized to teach in that receiving state if they have a reciprocal agreement. We think that might be a model that states, as they begin developing these course catalogs, can start sort of working together in a way so that a course approved in one state can be automatically approved in a corresponding state that has, again, this reciprocal agreement. So that's something that we think is an interesting issue we want to explore, and again, kind of builds on this trend of states shifting to brokering of courses. Second big trend is this notion of, Susan was talking about this too as part of iNACOL's principles, but what is the best way to measure quality of online programs in schools? And this is probably the foremost issue as it relates to a lot of the cyber charter school debates that are playing out in various states. It is also something a lot of state legislators are wrestling with just courses generally. Massachusetts is a good example in terms of how they essentially just imposed 37 new criteria, but very few, if any, were actually linked to any type of student outcomes. It was all very processy driven. And iNACOL has been doing a lot of good work here in terms of suggesting different student outcomes that can be used in terms of growth and performance and other sort of indicators. I think the debate that we're going to be facing as a community is not too dissimilar to what schools are wrestling with right now underneath ESEA waivers and what teachers are wrestling with underneath new teacher evaluation mechanisms, which are just what are the weights that get assigned to all these multiple measures. So how much should student growth count compared to proficiency, compared to other different types of indicators that can be measured here. I think that's a great debate and a healthy debate, and I think we can actually, as a community, almost take the lead here, just because our platforms and systems and online learning just generally can help provide richer and better data in many instances than what states have available for school accountability or for teacher effectiveness. So again, quality though is going to be a huge issue going forward. It's probably the #1 issue I get asked by policymakers, and so it's not just a matter of scaling online courses anymore. It's scaling. How do we scale and make available high quality online courses? Part and parcel to that is the political will to shut down low-performing providers, and this again plays out in the cyber charter school space, but it's going to be true in these brokered systems as well. That a good example is in the cyber charter school space. That the great bargain with cyber charters is that underneath charter authorization, you're given some regulatory flexibility in exchange for being held to a greater level of accountability. To the point where if you're not meeting your performance metrics, the authorizer can shut you down. And I think what the charter school community is largely sort of seeing right now is having some difficulty with authorizers not using that authority to shut down low-performing charters, be it a traditional school, a blended school model, or a cyber charter school model. So I think, again, we as a community need to help with sort of creating and giving them that cover so that there's a political will to shut down low-performing providers. Otherwise, I think what you see is a lot of pent-up legislative frustration, and then sort of bad legislation ends up happening. Or you see caps and other sort of weird things as a way of trying to help cap what they consider to be bad quality. New funding models. So this is another one where the Susan is again taking some work and some research on what is the best way of doing a performance funding model with online programs. There's issues too about funding following the student in terms of fractional funding and making sure that as a student starts blending some online courses with some traditional courses that they take at a school, that the funding is sort of that there's a mechanism and a funding formula that allows the funding to follow the student to those course providers of their choice. And so that's going to be a huge issue as well. Expanding and embedding blended learning systems and models within existing funding systems. So, this is something we've seen a couple states talk about, New Mexico and Pennsylvania for one, but as they do literacy programs, as they do STEM or math programs, about thinking about using a competitive priority for blended models, so that if you're using a blended model to do an adolescent reading program, you get more competitive points than someone that's just doing it in a traditional way. So again, trying to embed these as strategies, interventions, and approaches and models to really advancing and accelerating on other reforms, as well as working on separate sources of funds itself. So I think that's another area to look at too. And then lastly, something that I think a lot of us have been very focused on and concerned about, which is device and broadband investments needed to support the Common Core assessments in 2014 and 2015. This is not too far off in the distant future, and what we can see right now is that both Park and Smarter Balanced released the recommended technology specifications in December, as well as some broadband recommendations, and that is now showing that there are some pretty large gaps in some of our states and some of our school districts in terms of having the devices and the speeds necessary to have their students take on their to take these tests online. And so this is both a potential threat, but it's also an opportunity in the sense of it is probably going to capture a lot of state policymaker and education leaders at the district level, their attention in terms of needing to be prepared for these new assessments. And it gives us the opportunity, I think, to help message around how these devices and this broadband isn't just helpful in terms of being ready for the assessments, but really providing the baseline infrastructure that's needed to create these richer education experiences that we talk about with digital learning. So both the threat as well as an opportunity there. So lastly, and we didn't have a chance to really put in the slide, but just to talk a little bit about State of the Union last night. I think we heard the President lay out a very ambitious second-term agenda, including some pretty bold education proposals. It sounds like there is going to be a race to the top-like competition for high school redesign to create sort of a modernized and more engaging high school experience. We'll have to wait for the President's budget to see a little bit more details about what that would look like, but that could very well be an opportunity for blended learning models, online learning, and other types of digital learning to help with redefining and expanding the notion of what a high school is. There was sort of a teaser line in a program called an infrastructure program that would help with rebuilding a lot of our highways and bridges and transportation infrastructure, but it did make reference to school modernization as well. And I think we're waiting for the budget to get a little bit of a sense as to what that might look like and what types of technology that might purchase, or if it's just sort of a school modernization renovation sort of construction fund type of program. The early learning childhood, in terms of expanding that, is probably going to be the biggest dollar increase, and again, we'll have to wait for the budget to see the specific details, but there might be some opportunities to use technology there as well. So overall, it was a pretty ambitious agenda. Our sense from sort of looking at kind of what Congress is focused on is really from a domestic policy standpoint, the top focus right now is going to be on the gun control proposals, but probably more from a legislative perspective, immigration reform. There's just sort of an emerging consensus that's forming across sort of bipartisan lines for the contours of the bill that would move, and it would touch on education a little bit with the DREAM Act and with allowing students that foreign students that graduate from colleges with a STEM degree to receive a green card. There's also been a couple proposals to keep your eyes on that would raise the fees that employers pay for an H-1B visa, and those funds would go into a grant program to help with funding job training programs, but also STEM programs, including some online learning and computer science programs. I think that's actually sort of the sleeper issue that not too many education groups are really paying too much close attention to. But in terms of a lot of these big funding projects, that's probably the one that's got the greatest likelihood to pass relatively quickly. One, because it doesn't rely on a tax sort of income; it's all fee-based. And then second, just because of the sheer sort of momentum that's bringing up around immigration reform. Now this could unravel at any point, and it has in the past, and back in 2007, and also another attempt back in 2010. So it could unravel at any point, but it's probably the one thing to watch. Second thing to watch from the federal standpoint is, again, just these conversations around the fiscal cliff, tax reform, and the budget. They're all intermingled and intertwined in some sort of way. So what happens with these fiscal cliffs and what happens with the sequestration has a direct impact on what happens with the President's budget request. The other proposals that were sort of, again, loosely given as a framework last night, you'll probably have a pretty uphill battle in terms of at Congress, who has not been able to sort of get much agreement or consensus within chambers, much less between the House and the Senate, on passing anything education related in the last couple of years. So it really looks like from a K-12 agenda standpoint, a lot of the conversation has shifted from federal proposals to really state implementation. It's really going to be all about what's happening with states implementing Race to the Top, districts implementing Race to the Top district grants, I-3 implementation, and then ESEA waivers. And there's these waivers are going to really take hold this year, and there's going to be a lot of sort of lessons learned and tweaks that have to be made. And so that's the last place to look. And I think with that, Susan, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, John. We're getting ready to go into the question and answer time. I had a couple of questions last night during the President's State of the Union address. I heard you use this term. I heard the President use it last night. the term called sequestered funding. The President actually said that's a term we use inside the Beltway. Can you explain what this sequestered funding concept is?
Sure. Yeah, it is a very tricky sort of term. What it means it's essentially a series of automatic spending cuts that were scheduled to kick into place. This was meant to be sort of an alternative that was so scary to both the administration as well as to all the members of Congress, and both the Republicans as well as the Democrats, that it would force them to come together to deal with debt issues, with a bunch of tax issues, and with just a lot of spending issues, to kind of get the spending under control. And the notion was that if you don't, then you're going to have these huge cuts given to military programs, defense programs, which would upset Republicans, and then to a lot of domestic programs, which would hypothetically upset a lot of the Democrats. And so it was to sort of force that negotiating. When those negotiations broke down, it created this scheduled sequestration cuts that were supposed to take place. Those got delayed in part for a couple of months, and that's kind of what we're waiting to see what happens now, is if those cuts are going to be allowed to go in place, or are they going to be partially saved off, or are they going to be, fully sort of implemented? And Congress can do all sorts of things with the administration to sort of prevent this. They can pass various types of budget mechanisms that could sort of punt it down the road. They could address some of the funding issues that sort of trigger the cutting off of the sequestration. But otherwise, what you end up looking at is probably, a lot of, I think the way that it looked from OMB's perspective, the Management and Budget Offices, was about an 8% cut in various types of education funds. It would be steeper for some programs, and it would be steeper for some districts, but that's generally sort of the way it would look. If you want, there's a great sort of website too, the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, which you can get to at pgpf.org, has a great sort of website orienting you to these conversations, the sequestration, and also have just a lot of helpful graphs and ways of sort of taking all the Washingtonian legislative speak and make it into English.
Thanks, John. pjpf.org, and we'll be keeping an eye on that to keep our members up to date on those issues. There was another question that came in. John, do you see any impact from the NCLB waivers on digital learning?
So the biggest impact is that it has completely changed the way that schools that are identified as needing improvement get calculated. And so states, again, this is very similar to the debate we've been having in online learning, that there was this sort of pent-up frustration of the old NCLB model of just using proficiency scores as being, and maybe grad scores and attendance rates as being too limited. And states and schools wanted accountability based on multiple measures, including growth and including, participation and passage on things like AP exams and grad rates, a whole litany of different things. A couple states are experimenting with student surveys. So the student evaluations wouldn't count, as like 25% of a school's grade, but would count as some percent, so some student involvement. So lots of experimentation happening there, but that's going to impact potentially the way that some of the states, evaluate, either blended charter schools, because charter schools are caught up in all that, as well as with, depending on the online programs. It also, I think gives a chance too for us as a community to kind of help inform those processes, because now that states have a little bit more flexibility and freedom to propose their own systems, they can make tweaks to that, and there's other ways of, again, trying to balance how much should student growth count versus student proficiency. This is a debate that's happening not just with school accountability models, but also with teacher evaluation systems. And so, those debates are going to very much influence how online programs and online schools are judged and held accountable, or evaluated in terms of effectiveness and quality. So I would look to those discussions and debates to kind of get a sense of what might be coming our way. But then more importantly, how do we help influence those conversations so we're setting our own destiny and driving a path to our own future, so to speak, too. The other thing that happens with the ESEA waivers too is that there's a little bit of an element. There's two things that happen. There's some schools can be labeled as low performing, but actually not have any interventions kick in. The interventions to do school turnarounds only kick in at the bottom 5 and 10% of the low performing schools. There's a real element here of you're sort of capping failure. You could actually have more of your schools that aren't doing so well, but from a federal standpoint, the way the department's constructed this is that only state has to focus attention on the bottom 5% and bottom 10% performing schools. That could create some opportunities in terms of using online and blended learning models and tools and resources to help with addressing and improving some of those turnarounds. But it's something where we haven't seen, traditionally a lot of the blended charter operators trying to go in and do school turnarounds. And so, this is something that we may have to cultivate kind of from within the charter community and the traditional school community about how to give them both the vision, the tools, the resources, and support to try out these models as part of their turnaround efforts.
Thanks, John. We had an interesting conversation. Mark Schneiderman is joining us here, and he commented on E-rate expansion and then had a follow-up comment asking, is there any evidence you see that any states will increase or shift funding to invest in Race to the Top, Common Core, state standards, tech readiness, hardware, broadband, applications, etc.?
Mark always gets a question in. So, I would think candidly, Mark, having been talking to some state chiefs as well as to, I had the chance to talk about this problem to governors, education policy aides back in October. And the thing that surprised me was that none of the education policy staff really knew about this as an emerging problem. And I would say that that's still mostly the case as it relates to the state policy officials I'm talking to. I'd say there's been a little bit more of an uptick between November and January, and that's mostly because the technology recommended specs were released by the two assessment consortia. It's also because both assessment consortia just have had higher order of magnitude issues to work out. There's been a lot to have to deal with in terms of assessment design, testing schedules, the schedules for delivery of these assessments, the procurements. There's just a lot of governance and sort of just general leadership and management that was sort of needed with the assessment consortia that prevented them from, I think, giving a lot of attention and focus to this. The second thing that's been sort of challenging this space is because it's not a well-documented problem. Susan and I have been in conversations recently about this in terms of you don't have a lot of states that have done a very thoughtful sort of technology readiness gap analysis with their districts. Both assessment consortia released readiness assessment tools to kind of get a sense of the technology infrastructure needs of the districts, but the use of those have been somewhat uneven. There have been a couple other tests that have been available. The Education Superhighway has a broadband speed test that schools can use, but again, that's been somewhat uneven too. I think I really like the approach that Louisiana is taking, which is they're doing essentially quarterly reports off of surveys to get a sense of the progress with their districts in terms of having compliant devices as well as the prerequisite sort of bandwidth. The reason that's important is because you need both that sort of realization that there's a potential issue here as well as the gap identification that's sort of happening from these surveys in order to, again, either marshal new funding and resources or to reallocate the funding and resources to cover the broadband and the devices. So it's something that we've been actively encouraging the states to do, and to start sort of making this a required element of their reporting, whatever tool they have, whether it's tech reporting, Title I reporting, but use existing reporting mechanisms in order to understand how big of a problem that they and their schools are going to be facing. You know, E-rate reform is, you know, personally speaking, it really is dramatically needed. The president talked, I think, very eloquently last night about the need to reform our tax code. And, you know, from a school and education standpoint, the closest thing to the tax code that a school faces is E-rate forms and the E-rate process. And it is just sort of a program that, you know, again, was designed in the late 90s and early 2000 periods for a specific need. And yeah, I think our education system has evolved. It's evolved with new accountability system waivers. It's evolved as a result of competency-based learning and digital learning and online learning and blended learning. It's evolved in terms of the uses of tablets and smartphones and e-book readers and other types of devices. It's evolved because of the new requirements with the assessments. And so I think that really you know, there's an opportunity here for the FCC to kind of align the telecom program that is E-rate with the education sort of models and systems that we are, you know, seeing kind of sweep the nation right now. I hear episodically that there might be some, you know, one-time funds that could potentially be used here. I think people are thinking about sort of unused funds, or about an interest rate that may, you know, generate an interest rate change that may generate sort of a sudden swell of contributions to the E-rate. But, you know, it's one of those things that one-time funds and carryover funds, that's helpful, but the program itself needs to be, you know, I think modernized and simplified. It doesn't need to be ended. It just needs to be sort of modernized and better aligned to kind of the education needs that schools and families and kids are facing right now.
Yeah, and I just follow up with that, saying I think it's critically important. The tech infrastructure in our schools, and most of the schools that we get out to who are trying to run digital learning programs, online and blended learning, face huge obstacles, and especially in the school-to-home connection. And when we've been talking to state education policy leaders about the opportunity to make the shift to digital learning, and how that shift is going to be driven by the fact that in 2014 you've got online assessments that are needed to be administered. When you ask these state policy leaders, are you ready? What is your plan for implementation around the Common Core of these assessments? There are an awful lot of them who haven't begun to think about this, and I would really point them to Louisiana. And John, the example that you mentioned, the other really important piece that I want to hit home with everyone who is involved in developing and leading these new learning models is the data for proving the need on a technology readiness gap is not readily available to the federal policymakers, at the Department of Ed, at the FCC over E-rate. And we have, I think, a need for a call to action to the field, where there are reports where you have data or information to show that readiness gap in the technology infrastructure. So please help and start sharing that and making it aware. I think there could be some interest in federal E-rate expansion to help with this implementation of online assessments in 2014, but it's really in our hands to do a good job with our policy advocacy and making the case. We have other questions that are coming in here. One of the other pieces is one of your first slides, John. In 2015, if that's when we really think that there may be a delay and other priorities until ESEA reauthorization occurs, there was just a hearing last week from many of the state chiefs testifying up on Capitol Hill on the need for ESEA reauthorization. That these ESEA waivers are just a Band-Aid, and that states are caught in this middle ground right now and are likely to be caught in this middle ground for the next 12 months, 24 months. This is a really important time, it seems, for those of us and our members that have programs to reach out to their own federal representatives in the House and in the Senate, and their state legislative leaders in the General Assembly and in the House and in the Senate, to show them the kinds of innovative programs on the ground and make clear what they need for ESEA reauthorization. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, I just think it was a very weird 2012 in that you had you had ESEA waivers on one hand. You also had what was arguably probably some of the biggest movement on ESEA from a legislative standpoint, since this act's been up for reauthorization. You had the House, come to some agreement in a committee, and as well as the Senate. They were completely two different approaches to how do you do ESEA, but at least you had bills that were sort of moving and passing through committee. The biggest, I think, challenges are probably twofold with ESEA. One is there is still there is no sort of consensus on what the accountability system should look like. Everyone sort of agrees NCLB may have been too punitive and too narrow. That said, no one really knows what do you replace it with. If you just sort of open up the floodgates, you potentially allow states or school districts to set very low accountability thresholds, and then you have a lot of students, particularly low-income and minority and disadvantaged students, potentially not get served. But trying to find that sweet spot of even setting minimum standards or minimum requirements or minimum thresholds or guardrails, whatever you want to call it, all begins feeling sort of like mandates to some members and their staff up at Congress. And so that debate about what do you allow, what do you have legislation decide, what do you have federal regulations decide, and then what do you leave to states and to districts to decide, that's where there's like the most disagreement. And it's not a Republican-Democrat thing, that's just a debate we're having as an education community. The second thing is just, again, just trying to figure out what is that, which is sort of packaged in this, but what is the right federal role in what should that look like? So, the ESEA waivers are playing out against, that sort of backdrop. And so, in some believe that what the waivers are going to do is kind of help inform the reauthorization process. Others feel like this can actually maybe potentially accelerate the reauthorization process, and the fact that if these waivers get implemented poorly or badly, or there starts to get stories of a lot of minority students or low-income students getting sort of pushed aside or not counted or counted differently. That was something that was happening in a couple states where they actually had different sort of goals and expectations for African-American kids than they did for the Caucasian kids, and it created a huge dust-up. Those things all sort of create new pressure for Congress to sort of try to create some sort of equal playing field. But it's a rich debate. I would say, the first place to start is with, again, your state policymakers, because they're the ones that, if they have an ESEA waiver, are shaping the accountability system, or shaping the supports and the teacher evaluation system. So, work with them and help shape that. And then, again, let your federal policymakers know, too, about the challenges and the opportunities that you're seeing and you're facing. But again, without that sort of groundswell of support, it's just going to be very difficult for a Congress that is dealing with a very weak economic recovery, dealing with immigration, with gun control, with a lot of fiscal issues that are just sort of popping up on a daily basis, that to focus on this without that sort of groundswell. So it really does come back to kind of the advocacy and the work and the stories and the data that you share with your policymakers, both state and federal.
Well, John, I know it's the day after the State of the Union, and there are some developments arising from that for you. I understand you have a hard stop at 10 till the hour, and I'll continue addressing the questions at the webinar until we are at the hour, but I just wanted to thank you so much for your incredible analysis and insight at the federal and state policy level today on behalf of iNACOL and our 4,000 plus members. Really appreciate the work you're doing and want to thank you.
No, thank you so much, and thanks to everyone. And I give my proxy vote to Susan Patrick. So thank you very much, Susan.
Thanks, John. So it is a day after the State of the Union, and I just wanted to mention to everyone on the webinar, if you're interested in some of the thoughts of last night, moments after the State of the Union, we reflected on the State of the Union address in my blog, Education Domain, which is on the main iNACOL website, inacol.org. Some thoughts related to the President's work. I think the administration has done an outstanding job in their Race to the Top programs over the past 4 years and the Investing in Innovation funds to really try to put some drivers behind new ways of looking at innovation and those competitions and the way they were developed to provide some cover to make changes in state policy that are important. I think he's got a really good team, and nod to Secretary Duncan, Jim Sheldon, and the work that Karen Cater has done over the last 4 years. I do think that perhaps the State of the Union address didn't go far enough to address true innovation and 21st century models of education, and I think it's up to all of us to continue to push. And as John mentioned, I think a lot of the leadership on Capitol Hill, they don't really know where to go for ESEA reauthorization, and the conversations that I have been having with different offices, they are truly interested and open to taking a step back from No Child Left Behind and completely starting from scratch to reconceptualizing what would accountability look like if we were truly to focus on preparing our students for the 21st century and to be globally competitive. And what would those accountability frameworks look like? And so we're trying to do a lot of work on thinking through the lens of moving away from a time-based system to a true learning-based system or a competency-based system that's student-centered, where students really can move at their own pace and they don't get caught in these scheduling conundrums with time and accountability being so fixed and so rigid. We believe that accountability is incredibly important, but that new accountability models could really generate strong data on student proficiency through these multiple measures and looking at assessment as a more holistic approach. Like many of the other foreign countries like Finland, South Korea, and others, you see a big focus on performance-based assessments, students actually demonstrating their knowledge and having that data on the ground through e-portfolios, through projects, through that demonstration of their work. So our work on competency-based education is a major multi-partner project called competencyworks.org. And Chris Sturgis, who's my partner in that project, and I are in the process of writing a blog post to advise the federal government, both those on Capitol Hill making policy decisions, as well as those in and across the administration and the U.S. Department of Ed, on what federal policymakers can do to help support competency-based learning models, new innovative learning models of online and blended learning, and not hold our students back. And in many ways, the policy constraints that we feel are holding our students back, we want to make that really clear, but we want to provide some very positive and constructive recommendations on how they might think about ESEA reauthorization. So first comment on the State of the Union on the Education Domain blog, a number of resources on the Competency Works website, and a last point on that, we will be doing a briefing on Capitol Hill on competency education on March 1st for those of you interested, or maybe in Washington, D.C. or in the area. There any other questions? We've got just time for a few more questions. And if not, I don't see any here. We can go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. As you have questions on policy issues at the federal and state level, if there's anything that we can do to assist with your advocacy efforts on the ground, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. I'll slide ahead to the last piece. Susan Patrick, Rob Darrow is our Director of Member Services. Feel free to reach out to John too. Any way that we can help in the policy and advocacy, we're here to support you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Bye-bye.